Welcome back to Kermode Uncut. I'm aware that I've been a little bit remiss recently in responding to your posts here on Kermode Uncut, which there are hundreds. Taking a little bit of time out from the Llama Tree Festival to look at what your responses have been to my blogs. I did a blog a few weeks ago having seen the film The Battle of the Sexes and saying, you know, it's interesting because I really don't care about tennis, but the documentary was brilliant. I was really excited by it. And I said, which documentaries have made you interested in a subject that previously you didn't really care for? Loads and loads of responses. Here are just a few. This from Benny Bagels. Beyond the Mat made wrestling a guilty pleasure till this day. This from Tony Coogs. I have to say that despite having no interest in the video game high score scene, The King of Kong, A Fistful of Quarters is an incredible documentary, a story that anyone can relate to, even if you've never heard of Donkey Kong before. And I have to say that was one of many posts referring to The King of Kong, which is, of course, very, very highly regarded. This from Tom Macute. For me, it's Man on Wire. I couldn't imagine anything more boring than tightrope walking. I still can't. Yet the protagonist has such passion for this totally inane activity that I was swept away with his story. The strange roles of the sidemen, the friendships, relationships, and the strains that they all bear are brilliantly portrayed. I think it's a very, very good post. I mean, I love Man on Wire. I have to say, it is not really about tightrope walking. It was more about tightrope walking between very, very tall buildings. In fact, I once briefly met Philip Petit, the star of that film, the man who had done that extraordinary tightrope walk between the Twin Towers, and I did feel compelled to kiss his feet, because those were the feet that had walked on a piece of rope between those two towers. Extraordinary. This from Captain Lee. When we were kings. I have no interest in boxing. I think it's a barbaric sport, but found this engrossing from start to finish, especially the whole political backstory of Ali having to fight in Zaire because of his refusal to go to Vietnam. I mean, again, this is very similar to the way that I felt about Battle of the Sexes. It wasn't really about the sport, it was more about the politics. Moving on, off the back of the DVD and Blu-ray release of Cloud Atlas, I went back and watched the film again, and I got more out of it the second time round. Still didn't think it was perfect, but I got so much more out of it than the first time. I thought, you know, if I watch it a third time, maybe it'll be really good. And I was asking you which films you find have benefited from repeat viewings. Lots of responses. This from Hayden's Movies. When I saw Cloud Atlas at the cinema, I felt much like yourself. I thought it was staggeringly crafted and brilliantly ambitious, but deeply flawed and overdrawn. However, I rewatched it on Blu-ray and it blew my mind. It's not perfect, no it isn't, but few other films have the gusto and bravery to attempt such a feat. Its monumental length seemed to fly by second time round, whilst on the initial viewing, I recall at least 3 cases of clock watching. That's very, very similar to the way I felt about Cloud Atlas. On to other films, there were some things that kept coming up. Blade Runner, many of you thought repeat viewings really helped. Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me, that's certainly one that people have discovered second or third time. Social Network actually came up a few times. This from Kylie 1989. For me, it has to be Lost in Translation. There were a few of you who said the same title. First time I watched it, I felt Murray and Johansson's characters were genuinely selfish and overall not very nice people. However, after watching it a second time, I appreciated many things that went unnoticed first time around, such as the underlying story of 2 contrasting lost souls meeting and going out their comfort zones to find who they really were. This, on top of the score and Sofia Coppola's choice of backdrops, now make this my favourite movie, which is pretty much a total change. Just one other one on this subject. This is from Gumbo Gumbo. I find that Kubrick films in general can stand up really well to repeat viewings, but Eyes Wide Shut stands out for me as being the most enigmatic thing he ever made. Tom and Nicole's performances in the film have never really hooked me, but the attention to detail in the filmmaking is pretty mind-boggling. I almost find the performances to be sort of distracting and way too constructed when compared to the spaces in the film. The sets are the most realistic I can recall from any film, and to know that they were all constructed specifically for the film bends my head. I'm really glad you found all that in it. I still think it's a bunch of crap. Final thing, I recently did a blog from backstage at one of the concerts I've been doing with the City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra, which had been like an evening of film music that I curated. I specifically chose non-canonical stuff, you know, not the usual stuff. So it was Silent Running and Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me and Mary Poppins, which I suppose, you know, it is pretty mainstream. But I was asking, if you were to choose music from films that not everybody would generally regard as great film music, what would it be? Loads and loads of responses to this. Here are just a few. This from Mr. Hudson. I've always loved the opening theme to the original, not the remake, the original Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3, a magnificent, rollicking jazz track that sets you up for a rather magnificent film. Absolutely, it's a real shame about the remake. This from J.K. Joey. The most underrated film score of our time is undoubtedly Brick by Nathan Johnson, a truly innovative score. This from Colin. chooses a number of scores, but this was the one that caught my attention, the score to Darren Aronofsky's The Fountain by Clint Mansell. In particular, the climactic Death is the Road to Awe and its segue into the piano track over the end credits. And finally, this from Joe Cameron chose a number of pieces of music, all good choices, but the one that caught my eye was Crash by Howard Shore. I know The Good Doctor is a huge fan of this piece, and for good reason. It literally sounds like a car being taken apart. And what's interesting about that post show is I really, really love that score. And it had never occurred to me that that is what it sounds like. But now you say it, yes, it does.